Hey folks, Ray at DCRainmaker.com here, just to give you a little bit of context about what you're about to watch. So this is the keynote that I gave at the Garmin Connect IQ Summit earlier this week. That summit is for third-party developers, so like in the Apple world, it's equivalent to like WWDC, Microsoft equivalent to Build, same thing, aimed at developers of third-party apps on the Garmin platform. So everyone from like Strava to Spotify is there, like MasterCard, all these companies that have apps or tie-ins with Garmin are there. And they invited me to give a keynote presentation to these companies about wearables. Now, there's no like guidance on that, so I just did what I did, and I called it the I think like successes and failures, potential and failures, or something like that of the wearable industry. And I just go through it. And if you know me and know my presentations, I don't hold back no matter where I am. So you're going to hear the good, bad, and the ugly about the industry, including things about Garmin. Also, Garmin didn't pay me to be there. In fact, I paid for all my own travel, everything I paid myself. So anyways, just want to give you insight on that. Enjoy it. Hope you find it interesting. Again, it's aimed more at the industry crowd, but I think you'll find a lot of things really fascinating about it in terms of what I think about sports technology, what's working, what's not working. Just enjoy. Oh, and if you do find this interesting as you go along, whack that like button at the bottom there. It really helps out the channel quite a bit.
Rainmaker is behind DCRainmaker.com, which focuses on sport technology from GPS watches to action cameras and indoor trainers to drones. He was ranked as one of the 50 most influential people in running by Runner's World magazine and recently profiled by Outdoor magazine for his gear review empire. The site produces the most in-depth reviews and analysis of sports technology products out on the web today and gathers more than 3 million views a month. One other point, since it's not in here, that I'm going to make is that he's also got a podcast now called Fit File. It's DC Rainmaker podcast called The Fit File with GP Llama. And so go into Spotify and use your premium code and then follow his podcast. So please welcome to the stage, Rainmaker.
Thank you very much for having me here, and hopefully welcome to everyone who's following all along online. We just got it down to a minute. Like all live streams, you wait to the last 3 minutes and then hope it works out, and it never does. So I think we're good though. So if it's working out, I've got the thumbs up in the back, it's good. So thank you for folks that are joining online. So the title of the presentation is Opportunities and Failures in Sports Tech, which the second part of that should make it kind of fun. If you've seen my presentations in the past, you know that I like to talk about what's working in sports tech and maybe what's not working in sports tech, with the aim of hopefully making progress towards making it work. And you know, I won't spend a lot of time. I think almost everyone here knows who I am, but there are definitely some different industries in this room that aren't necessarily sports focused. But essentially, I run a review site. I guess you can call it a blog, but started off as a personal blog, and now it reviews sports tech devices across the spectrum. So whether it be running watches or action cameras or drones or activity trackers, it's anything that's like fitness-y focused. That just sort of appeals to me, to be honest. Like there are certainly things that may not appeal to me that I'm not covering, but I think it's something that pops up and is interesting to me. And I find that most times that's also interesting to you as well. I do this now as a full-time job. I'm now based in Amsterdam. So I used to be in Paris. I'm based in Amsterdam. And my goal is to sort of pick things apart. My reviews are sure they're covering whether or not the device is good or bad, but also I want to understand why it's good or bad, and then understand from the company why it's good or bad. I know, especially in this room of mostly technical people, there's always a reason why you chose to do the sucky thing. And the question is trying to figure out why you did what you did. So I can explain it, because I find that when I explain, or anyone explains something to end users about why the device does the sucky thing they do, then they're more willing to understand how they got in that situation and the trade-offs that were made, because it is always trade-offs. It's not like you just set out to do something a bad way. One of the most interesting misconceptions, though, is that it's all like super techie people like yourselves that read the blog, and in reality, it's across every possible spectrum. In fact, the majority of people that read the site are there primarily looking at like basic activity trackers, so things like basic Fitbits and VivoFits and whatnot, and all the way up then to Olympians and the media and everyone else. And this picture here is actually taken at the open house that we had back in November, December in Amsterdam. Some 200 people showed up for that. That was absolutely bonkers to me. It was kind of cool to see people in real life. Like I I type online, I sit behind a computer, and I go for runs where no one can see me, and then to see like real people, it was awesome, and see across all walks of life. So that's a little bit of the backstory there. But what is sports tech? And I think, in this room, we sit there and go, oh, sports tech is something on our watch or maybe on our bike. But there are lots of things that are sports tech here. And, it could be things that are wristband devices. And you say, well, there's an activity tracker, or is a optical heart rate sensor, something like the Whip Band, for example, that, isn't like a watch. It's just tracking data behind the scenes. Is it something on your upper arm? Is it something that's embedded in clothing now? Is it a chest-based device? And even with now, there's so many different ways to look at sports tech. And I try to look at lots of different realms there. And that gets to a little bit of like, what is wearable tech? And it's funny, so this is IDC's estimates on where the wearable tech industry. And this is really interesting for what's shown there and what's not shown there. So Apple leads the 2018 shipments at 26.2 million, and then down from there, numbers are pretty obvious. But what is wearable tech in this definition? And this year, wearable tech now includes audio devices. So in the past, when you looked at this number from IDC, it was basically just like watches and things like that. Now it's audio devices, which is why you look at this and go, how do these numbers just double overnight? But it's even more interesting when you start looking at smartwatch numbers, because those numbers have changed every single year. Not the numbers, but the definition behind them. So it used to be that, a smartwatch was like a Forerunner, 15, 20, 25, something in that range that was just like a very basic, it technically connected to your phone and it had some smarts in it, it had GPS, that was considered a smartwatch. But by today's standards that IEC and many other people use, that's no longer considered a smartwatch because it doesn't have an app store on it, it doesn't have all these different metrics. And so it's really interesting when looking at these numbers to make sure you're looking at the same thing. Because if you compare year over year, and you looked at this number from last year, you'd be like, holy crap, 2018 was bonkers. And it was, but not in the same realm. So things to ponder a little bit as we kind of go through here. So I showed this back, I think last fall, about what a normal bike ride looks like for me. And this is a ride I did up to Stelvio in August, July, something like that. And this is all the crap that was on me and my bike at the time. So 3 power meters, 3 bike computers, 3 heart rate straps, and there are different places on me. So I've got a chest strap on. I have 2 optical heart rate straps on just under the corner of my jersey on either arm, 2 GPS watches, 2 tire pressure sensors. I've got bike lights that are barely, there was one in the front, but I didn't actually want to show it here because when I took this picture, it wasn't announced, so I put them in my pocket for the picture, but they're there on the bike. The helmet's connected, it can do audio on it, it can tell me like where I am within group rides, electronic gear shifting, speed sensor, an action camera, and yes, even a drone in my back pocket. All that crap is there. And certainly I'm an anomaly, like not everyone's necessarily going to ride with all this stuff on there. But if you start taking away the numerals in front of each one of these things, a lot of you are. A lot of people are riding with a power meter or a bike computer or a heart rate sensor, or they have another GPS watch in their arm just because that's what they wear day to day. They may not have, tire pressure sensors and may not have a drone in their back pocket, but I would guess that a lot of people going up to Stelvio that day probably had a fair chunk of the same gear, just not the same quantity of it. And that's so looking like at sports technology trends. And I think, the biggest thing that we've seen is it's all about the data. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that's both good and bad. But it's also making devices that people want to wear that are fashionable. And certainly you saw plenty this morning about the Mark watches that you see up there. But I think in some ways it's making those fashionable watches not like crazy bling. Like we've seen the trend, you remember like the Polar, they did something where they had a band that was lined with diamonds, right? An activity tracker lined with diamonds. And that didn't work out. Just like Apple's $10,000 watch didn't work out. And people are looking at going, yeah, I want sophistication in my wearables, but I don't want it to be absolutely bonkers over the top. And I think we're seeing that kind of finding the middle ground now. Now for some people, a $2,500 watch isn't really the middle ground, and that's totally fair. But we're also seeing those options start to extend where if people want to spend that much money and want to go into that realm, they can. And it's interesting too, because you look at this and you say, are people trying to replace that classical timepiece? And that's been a lot of discussion I've seen on the post and whatnot. I've written about Mark, and there's this kind of divide of people looking at going, this is replacing a classical timepiece. And I look at the other side saying, no, it's not. Its goal isn't to do that. Its goal is to be a high-end gadget in the same way that a camera person will buy a high-end camera every couple of years, or a phone. You know, the new iPhone now costs $1,000 or more, a new Samsung phone even more. It's that same sort of thing. You're buying a watch for a preset period of time. And would I personally buy a $1,500, $2,500 watch? No. I'll wear it for a few weeks to try it, or a few months, but I'm not going to buy that personally. But there are people that would. Just like I personally will buy a camera that costs that same ballpark, use it for 3 or 4 years, and then know that that camera has passed on and it's moved on, right? It's the same thing. Different people have different areas they want to focus on. So I think when you view it in that lens, it starts to make more sense than just a watch that you pretend is a classical timepiece long term. We're also seeing things that are starting to solve actual real-world health problems, and I'll talk a lot about this with especially Apple, but other companies as well, as opposed to just throwing data at you and saying, good luck. Now we're getting to the point of actually trying to solve these problems that can potentially save someone's life, which I think is sort of the end goal of some of these different health and fitness kind of in medical focuses. And then finally, keep in mind that the platform is driving your experience. And you've seen that today already, talking about cases where the app side of things is just as important as the device itself. You know, with the new Connect IQ store, previously, if you couldn't find those apps and those watch faces and all the goodness that this room is creating, then it didn't really matter, because that's the app side of that was failing in delivering that to the device. And hopefully now with the new store, that'll help that. But that's just one example, particular to this room, of where the platform behind it is so important. So it's funny looking at what becomes a norm over time. You know, look at this chart here, and almost every single box is checked as to what is the norm on these for these companies for devices roughly over $200. Versus if you went back just a year ago or even 2 years ago, that wasn't the case for a lot of these. The whole entire wearables industry has just moved so fast, and it's so awesome because there's so many things that are there. And you see at the top, those are all like the common things, with the exception of sleep on Apple, that every single wearable has. And you get down to the bottom, then you get contactless payments becoming more and more popular as that price point continues to plummet. You get music on the watch, and you get this medical features realm that, again, we'll dig into in a moment. But I want to kind of step back into that music bit there, because it's interesting. Music services are becoming this like Cold War playground on wearables. And you know, you look at where we were just 1 year ago when I stood here, and Spotify wasn't on Garmin devices. In fact, Spotify wasn't on really any wearables, except for like one random wearable that you've never heard of in your life that apparently was like a deal someone made drunk one night somewhere. Like, and you're like, how did Mighty get a deal with Spotify, right? And so that was like the only one, and it was on a handful of random Samsung wearables, but not all Samsung wearables. And so what we've seen over the last literally 12 months, and even more so the last 6 months, is just this explosion of all these music providers out there, all these streaming providers, realizing they need people to be on people's wrists. They've conquered the phones, now it's onto the wrist. And in some ways, it's like a social network. If it's not where you are, you're not going to use it. So if that platform isn't on my wrist, I'm not likely to use it, because I want to use it across all the activities I do. If I'm sitting at my computer, using my desktop, and if I'm on a plane, I'm using my phone, and so on. And so it's been really fascinating to see that move forward. Of course, users are always demanding. So this was just the day after the the AMP Plus Symposium in October, I think it was, and Garmin had just announced Spotify support for their wearables. And these are the reactions from people within like minutes and hours. And it was basically like that's nice, but where's everything else? Like, what have you done for me lately? Or lately defines as last 30 seconds. But in this case, these are other platforms. So these are people asking for everything else out there. And it's interesting because, yeah, you could write it off and be like, folks are being a bit greedy, but not really. They just want to use these platforms. They have people who are using Apple Music or Google Music or Amazon or whatever it may be, and they expect to be there. And if we look at where those platforms are going, I tried to put this together last night, and it's messy because most of these platforms really suck at telling you what you could actually do on these wearables. So you can see across the board as to which platform and which wearable on there. And there's a lot of asterisks, and there's probably more asterisks than show up here. And so the asterisk means that, yes, they technically have an app on that platform, but the app is more or less useless. And by useless, I mean you can't actually cache the music on your wearable. To me, if you have an app on a platform but can't put the music on that watch, that's just a remote control. It's not really an app. That's just simply playing music on my phone. So, but we're seeing certainly down the bottom there, Spotify is moving quickly. Like the in progress for Apple means that yes, they have an app, but it's not quite finished yet to the point of having offline caching of music on that device. And so this is where I think it'll be fascinating a year from now to look at this chart and figure out how much this is filled in. And I think the lines, the music services that have the most things filled in and the wearable companies that have the most things filled in will be the winners in their respective categories, because people want to have the music where they are. Still, there are challenges there. For example, most wearables and apps can't stream over LTE, right? So you have to pre-download ahead of time. You have to decide what you want to listen to before you head out the door. For some people, that's not a problem. For others, it's more challenging. Most wearables, if we step aside from streaming platforms, have super cumbersome onboarding processes for music. And by cumbersome, I mean like miserable, fall down the stairs and be laughed at type of processes. They're really, really bad. And the same is true about weird quirks and regions and stuff like that. So take this Samsung Galaxy Watch Active is the official name for it, that I have on my wrist here. This device claims to be Spotify compatible, and it is, but only if you have certain phones in certain regions. And so a couple weeks ago, I had this realization after I bought it and followed all the marketing saying it was Spotify compatible, and then I found out I couldn't actually load the Spotify app on this watch. And then I saw, I went through Reddit, because that's where all technical wormholes lead to, and you got to Reddit, and you're like, oh, you have to fly to Germany. And I'm like, Germany, why? Well, that's because if you're physically in Germany when you try to install the app, then the app will work. I'm like, okay, deal, I'll fly to Germany. So I did. I flew to Germany. It was technically a stopover somewhere else, but I'm like, this is great. I flew to Germany, got my camera out, ready to take a picture of me installing the app, and it didn't work. I'm like, what the heck? And I went back and looked, I'm like, oh, I didn't read the other part. You have to be not only in Germany, but you have to have a Samsung phone to install it. Just a regular Android phone won't work in this particular country combination. That's a crap experience. At the end of the day, that is crap. And I don't know who to blame there, and the Spotify folks are missing right now. So it's, not sure what they went to. And again, me as a technical person, I figured this out. I flew to a different country, and it still didn't work. And then again, a week later, it now works in the Netherlands where I was based on my non-Samsung phone just fine. And so you can see how users can be very, very frustrated with these experiences, and it's something that you've got to consider when you're rolling it out. And I don't mean to pick on Samsung and Spotify. There are plenty of examples across the industry. As I know, there are plenty of apps that claim one thing but aren't actually doing that. Shifting a little bit to medical maybe. So last year, I talked about how companies are going towards this medical device realm using this FDA program, software as a medical device, and now we're seeing the fruits of that. And so, for example, back in Apple, ECG support was rolled out into the US markets, and there are news stories every single week. There was one just yesterday about people whose lives were saved by Apple Watch ECG. And there was a massive study they've done. And some of the amazing things that Apple's doing is around the scale of the devices and the data they can pull from them because of the quantity of users out in the market. To be able to do a study in 3 months with 400,000 people in the study, that's incredible. That's what I think in some ways I dream of. I look at these things and go, that's amazing. They can do 3 months worth of data from 400,000 people across the country and then analyze that data, figure out if this makes sense or doesn't make sense to the future. That is amazing, amazing stuff. Certainly other companies are looking at it as well. Fitbit, has talked about some of their SpO2 related stuff, and Garmin's implemented in most of their more recent devices. In the case of Fitbit, they've talked a lot about these features, but they haven't actually push them into the marketplace. In the case of Garmin, they haven't certified these features from an FDA standpoint. They're just sort of there for you to leverage. Samsung is sort of on the side of things. They've talked about being in testing mode with different academic institutions, but again, haven't really pushed into that. And then Withings has announced products back in the January timeframe that should be shipping this week, next week sort of timeframe. Still, managing expectations on all this stuff is really, really difficult. So like I published up a picture of my heart rate from the ECG thing on the Apple Watch a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and someone was like, I think someone said, hey, I'm a nurse in a hospital, and I think you may have this condition. And I'm like, well then. But the challenge is I took that picture, like holding my camera like this, trying to get it snapped right, and it wasn't like a great reading. And I redid it, and it doesn't look like that anymore, right? And so it's one of those things where the conditions around some of these devices are influencing the results. And same is true of SpO2, for example. You know, most people, when they get an SpO2 reading, it's in a hospital. It's sitting down at a desk or a table or bed, very, very still. It is not at the beach. It's not on the side of a mountain at 22,000 feet. It's a totally different environment. And so people have these expectations of medical grade devices here, when in reality, the circumstances aren't a hospital. And I think managing that's going to continue to be very, very tricky. So with all this data from the medical side, there's also data that's just simply not medical. Like these things up here are what I've captured my last 24 hours looking like. So this is a slice of my last 24 hours. You can see I went for a run yesterday late afternoon. There's some training load stuff in there. That's more like 4-week load. But then there's body battery, which is telling me what my overall energy level of sorts is combined with stress. And this is all from the Mark watch in this case, but it can be from any Garmin watch, or even like other brands like Suunto and others have a lot of these same kind of similar metrics there. And it's interesting to look at some of this stuff. I have a point as to why I'm pointing all these out in a second here. So the heart rate, of course, you see decline over the course of the day. My stress level here in meetings with Garmin was reasonably high, and then still reasonably high. I went for a run, it was fine. And then whatever you all were doing last night at the open house thing or the party was definitely apparently stressful for me. So that's all interesting, right? And that's fine, but there's things that are missing. It doesn't show the impact of jet lag. I flew on Sunday over here. I flew for whatever it was, 14 hours or something to get here from Europe. So I'm 7 hours offset. And it doesn't tell me about today's run. Like after this presentation, I'm hoping to go out for a run. Should I do that run or not? None of this information actually tell me whether or not to do that. And it was funny. So I did my run last night, and I automatically synced over to Training Peaks, and my coach looked at it. And this is what he said. He said, still an excellent 734 pace, but heart rate is up, reflecting your body clock, catching up with you. I assume this is a post-workout run in the middle of the night Amsterdam time. Now, if you know my coach, he's a former Air Force colonel. He also basically fighter jet pilot, instructor fighter jet pilot. So when he says this, what he's actually saying was, oh, that was a cute run. Let's not do that again, right? That's the actual translation of this line here. It was, yeah, that was special. And of course, you can see my heart rates there. You don't have to look at the bottom half of that chart because there's nothing in those zones. It's the top zones of Z4 and Z5 for what I thought was a perfectly reasonable, easy run. And it wasn't. And it wasn't, not for all the reasons on the previous slide. All those things that Garmin thought they knew about me didn't really tell me anything, right? It didn't tell me whether or not to do this run or not to do this run. It didn't tell me whether or not to do today's run. Versus my coach in one line, without having access to any of that other data, without seeing anything on the previous slide, he knew what was going on. And how do we get technology from what my coach said in one line, or to what coach said in one line from what we just saw in the previous slide? And I think that's sort of the goal. That's where I want to get to, is everything is still very, very reactive right now. So for example, this watch, after my run today, will know the fact that it's hot out and basically shift things a little bit to account for that, because it's 81 degrees out today. But why isn't it doing it beforehand? Why is my watch not looking at me going, on your schedule today is a run for, let's say, 8-10 miles. Maybe you shouldn't do that at 2 p.m. Maybe that's a poor time to do that. Or maybe, hey, heads up in the morning, why don't you go ahead and maybe do this run a different time of day or shift the workout because you haven't acclimated yet, because of the fact that you've been living in a relatively cold place and now you come to this place that has a random hot day. That's where I think the technology has to get to be truly useful to people that are trying to do kind of more advanced coaching. Data is also funny as well when it comes to how it blends between consumers and companies. And so one of the more interesting things I saw in the last year was Bontrager releasing their own version of the Edge 1030. And this is just an Edge 1030 that's more stylishly black and has a Bontrager logo instead of a Garmin logo on it. But it also has a couple of Connect IQ apps on it, and in particular one app that ties into Bontrager Trek's kind of behind the scenes service platform. And what it does is, when a customer buys a bike, they put it in here and it goes ahead, then it tracks your mileage on that bike. And then from there, it can go ahead and give you recommendations. And it says, 24 hours of riding time, you should do this, and at 50 hours this, and 100 hours this. And that's actually pretty interesting. That's practical stuff, because while I know what maintenance I should be doing and then not doing because I ignore all those guidance bits, most consumers don't. Most consumers don't know how to use their bike. And then from a company standpoint, once a bike company especially ships that bike out the front door at that bike shop, they have no connection to that consumer at all. So this is trying to get them back into the bike shop for service to hopefully make their bike life happy. So from a consumer standpoint, the idea there is that your bike is serviced properly and it's not making crazy sounds and all that kind of stuff. And then from the company side, though, the ulterior motive is to get you in the shop to buy more things and spend more money and to know about you. So this is, to me, an interesting example of being kind of split in the fence of something that, potentially could be a bit creepy, right? Potentially could be a bit like overbearing, but I think they found this perfect middle ground of this is what we want to do with this data, and here's why it's going to benefit you. And some of these things too also link to like videos, and so you don't have to go into the shop. This could just simply be the recommendations of how to go ahead and keep your bike properly maintained. We also see cases of data that's collected from a sports technology standpoint that the individual user isn't really even using, and then it's projected somewhere else for someone else to enjoy. So for example, in pro cycling, there's dimension data and VLON and some others and whatnot that are using tracking systems that you've probably seen in the Tour de France. But what's behind them is almost more fascinating than what you may have seen on TV. So up top there is the seat there saddle, and off the back of it is a long thingy. And the thingy is technically an RF-based transmitter that takes in data from where the rider is and transmits that up to helicopters and motos. So it's not using cellular, it's actually just transmitting it just like TV signal. So the TV motorcycles that are moving around within the peloton are retransmitting that data as well up to the helicopter. And what you see here is this is one of the days of the tour last year where you see the helicopter's track, the airplane's track, rotating around the actual track of the race as they're completing these little circles following the race around. And really cool stuff. And what happens from that data is then, in this case with Dimension data, they're doing predictive analysis in real time and tweeting it out and on other social media platforms about what the probability of certain things is to happen. So on the top there, you can go ahead and see where the riders are, and all those tiny little dots that are way up the top corner are all the riders spread across that descent at that point in time. On the right-hand side here, you can see the likelihood that they're going to go ahead and catch the breakaway being the group of riders that went off the front of the peloton and is competing for the stage win that particular day. And this is all based on looking at the data from 170 riders in real time, figuring out, are they accelerating, what's the train looking like, all this stuff. It's fascinating. And then it gets you to 72%, which as a fan, you're like, 72%. That's tempting enough that I'll stay around, right? I could stay around. They probably wouldn't show this if it said like, catching the break 100%, because that's not super exciting cycling. But this keeps fans engaged. And then down the bottom, after the stage win, you can see the speeds that are shown there is 72.04 kilometers an hour. It's fascinating stuff. And then to note that the second place rider was going actually faster, but still lost, right? And you can see over time what the speeds look like. And it's amazing stuff that keeps people engaged. And they were tweeting this out the entire time. Now you may think this is simple. Behind the scenes, this is a beast. From a technical standpoint, they have two basically like RV type systems that are there on the tour that are rotating through. They have multiple data centers. They're streaming this stuff up and down. It's really impressive, cool technology stuff as to how they're doing this behind the scenes. And it keeps fans engaged. Still, there are questions about this kind of data. For example, almost everything that we saw there is not seen by the rider. The rider themselves isn't seeing like probability of catching the brake on their handlebars. That's not shown to them. This is all only shown to the fans, and then also the team cars are leveraging as well. But there's a question of, is this making cycling more exciting, or is it making it more boring, right? Are power meters, for example, making it so that riders are just riding to a given number and ignoring the race around them and ignoring the game of chance effectively in cycling? And there's a lot of discussion around that. I think some of it's certainly valid discussions to have. And the same goes for safety. Is some of this technology making it more safe? Like race radios is one that's often talked about, where the riders in these events have radios that are in their ear and back into the jersey pocket that they can communicate back and forth. And the idea, the theory behind that is that you could say, hey, there's a crash coming up around this corner as you're descending down at 50 miles an hour. Heads up, you should be aware of that. That is a logical safety thing. But I spent a full day last year in the Tour Down Under in a team car, and that's not what this technology is used for. This technology is used almost exclusively for race strategy and exclusively for communicating just back and forth like a coach would to athletes. And so in that case, is it making it more exciting? Maybe, probably not. Right? Probably not. It's probably giving too much away to what the game's going on. And so those are things that are interesting there. The same goes with anti-doping efforts as well. You know, a lot of this technology could be leveraged to figure out whether a rider's efforts are, you know, superhuman. Are they going up too fast these climbs? And we can look back on some of this data now over the last couple of years and look back to rides that occurred, you know, the last 15 to 20 years, and people have done the math and go, no, that was physically not possible. The acceleration rates on some of these attempts, the speeds, physically not possible as a human without some sort of assistance behind the scenes. And this is where the technology is sitting right now of people trying to decide, do we start to open this up a little bit to anti-doping, anti-cheating efforts, you know, people trying to stick the motors inside of bicycles. How do we protect against that, but also protect the riders' and privacy interests longer term? And there's some fascinating discussions there, and I'm really excited to see where those will go over time. Kind of shifting a little bit to some of the things that are accelerating in sports tech, some of the things that are stalling in sports tech, and then some of the things that are just flat out failing in sports tech. One of the things that's interesting to me is how quickly the barrier to product entry in wearables is rising, and especially in the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months. You know, it used to be just a few years ago, you could put out a basic GPS running watch between 100 and 250 bucks, sell it, and you'd be fine, no matter what your brand was. For the most part, branding obviously helped in marketing, whatnot, but you could be competing in that realm just fine. I think TomTom pulling out of the market, you know, a year or so ago, proved that's not the case. TomTom, one of the biggest companies out there, said, nope, this isn't working for us. We can't compete in this market anymore. And I think the same is going to be true of watches, especially at that $200-ish price point, where you have companies like Samsung. Like this watch here is 200 bucks. GPS, Spotify on there, so offline music caching, contactless payments, it's optical heart rate sensor, like 200 bucks. The Apple Watch frequently goes on sale for sub $200, $199. And it's not there as an everyday price, right? But when that happens, that's going to shift things down much more quickly. And if you sit there at Best Buy or any location going, an Apple Watch at 200 bucks, or a brand I maybe never heard of, or a screen that isn't as pretty at 200, 300, 350, who's going to win? And that makes it even more difficult for new startups to come into this market because their manufacturing capabilities just simply aren't going to be able to compete with the larger players. At the same time, I think even more so is true of that $400+ bracket or price point there, where we're finding that Suunto and Polar is having an even harder time competing on features. And you know, Suunto and Polar used to compete on accuracy. That was their stick in life. They said, hey, we've got the features, aren't necessarily as, you know, we don't have many features as Garmin, but we have accuracy. We have amazing GPS accuracy, heart rate is strong and whatnot. But as companies have sort of switched different vendors from chipset vendors into different technologies, we've seen those accuracy things go away. And so that advantage that they've had has started to go away. And now they're left competing on features. And if there's one thing you're noticing today already, and you're probably going to notice over the next 2 days, there's not a game you want to get into Garmin with on competing on features, because you're going to lose. You're going to lose every time. You know, the way to beat Garmin is to compete on things like making a beautiful watch like the Apple Watch, or, you know, pricing it right like with Samsung. It's incredibly difficult to compete on features and have the same price points. So I think that's going to be very, very tough for people to come into this market. We're seeing some do it, like Chorus up here is kind of doing it with their wearables, but it's not quite the same. This is going to be even more true, I think, in the cycling realm as well over the next year or so, where it's just going to make it much more difficult for folks to compete in the cycling realm. One of the things that it continues to accelerate beyond, I think, anyone's wildest imagination is social training inside. So, Zwift right now likely has between 200 and 250, maybe 300,000 active users, which is mind-boggling. And you said how fast and how far they've gone in the last 4 years. But what I'm finding is more interesting isn't like Zwift as a platform of running around this virtual world and whatnot. That's where it started. That's where I think everyone got addicted to it in some way. But I think where people stay addicted to it now is the events. And we're seeing, obviously, Zwift has recently got $120 million in investment, primarily targeted at esports, and you've seen some of the esports are doing around that. But I think it's more the regular person events that are fascinating. So for me, I choose to Zwift now, and I choose to race and ride events, not because I have any chance or any desire to win those events, but because they hold me accountable to being in that game and to hold me accountable to finishing that workout. So I look at the schedule for the day and go, oh yeah, I will join the 531 other people today riding the Tour of Autopia at 11 a.m. And I took a screenshot this morning at, I think it was like 8 or 9 a.m., so that's probably double this right now if you go on the platform and look at that. Just riding one virtual event. So if I were to jump into that virtual event, there's no way in hell I'm going to stop riding until I finish that event. Because what happens after that is my workout gets uploaded to Strava. And I don't want any of the 18,000 people that follow me on Strava to be like, so you didn't finish, did you? I'm like, no. So it's this social pressure to get your workouts done that I think is becoming more interesting than the actual workouts itself in some of these sort of cases. And again, I'm never going to win this race on any category here at all. And that's for a lot of reasons. One, I'm not athletically gifted enough. And two, there's lots of problems in the platform around cheating and things like that. But that's fine. I don't care to win. I just want to have some reason to be riding and be held socially accountable out there. And the same is true of Peloton as well. You see that for people. I have friends that have purchased Peloton bikes. And once you start that session on a Peloton bike, you're finishing that session because you don't want to be the person that, again, uploads that workout or jumps out of that workout early. And I think that's super, super powerful. At the same time, we're also seeing that shift outdoors as well. So back in December, Specialized announced this new helmet here, and with that, it took in one of their acquisitions around accident detection, crash detection, and whatnot. But as part of that, they also announced an app with it, and that app allowed you to do group ride kind of communication. So the idea that you could set up a group ride within the app and then go ahead and track where people are relative to the group ride. So one of the challenges with outdoor group rides is one, organizing it. Everyone uses Facebook except people don't use Facebook. And then you have to use text messaging, and then you're on WhatsApp, and then it's just a complete cluster. It's been a cluster for forever. And everyone acknowledges it's bad. So the idea of having this in an app makes a ton of sense. And Specialized wasn't locking this into just Specialized users. It's anyone can download the app. It's called Ride, so it's not even Specialized branded per se. That makes a ton of sense. And starting to use technology for basic things like ride planning. Now, one would probably step back and go, why the heck is Specialized doing that? And that's probably a valid question. That, in my opinion, that's a much better product idea for someone like Strava or a Garmin that has a larger user base to tap into. But the idea is sound, and trying to get this social element that's been so distributed into something that is cohesive and makes sense is amazing. And then from there, when you start the ride, John, who is running 5 minutes late, like he always is, can now figure out where you are in real time and track up to you or catch up to you. That's logical, as opposed to, again, trying to text people as you're riding down the road back and forth. Where are you, man? I don't know. It's just, this is so much smarter. We're even just seeing Trainer Road. In the last 24 hours, Trainer Road has announced outside workouts. So the idea of taking their inside workouts and pulling them back outside. And there's so much potential they could do there once they start to kind of take that feature and evolve it a bit more. So that's examples of things that are accelerating in the right direction, I think. Still, there are things that are starting to stall. And I think running power is the one that each time I talk about running power, my perception, my thinking on it gets worse and worse. And I think there's 4 reasons why this is the case. One, accuracy. Nobody agrees. I can run with 4 different running power companies, and every single one is dramatically different. Not like 5% different, not 10% different. We're talking like 30% different. And each company has their own reasons why they think they're right, and that is glorious. But it doesn't help me. It doesn't help the consumer. And because I don't trust the technology, then other people, like coaches, don't trust that technology. My coach, that we saw earlier there, he gets running power from his athletes on different platforms, and he's like, I don't know what to do with this. It's too different to be of use. And I think until these companies come together, get locked in a room and told to work it out in terms of what the definition of running power is, this portion of the industry will not take off, because you have to have some known constant, some known good to base everything off. Then we had a price. The entry price right now for running power for most of the solutions except Garmin's is $200 for a pod-based system, and then from there, realistically, a $400 plus watch. So in the case of Polar, them putting running power into the watch itself where you require no pod, that's awesome. But that starts off at $400. And in the case of Garmin, again, running power for watches starts at roughly $400. And you buy the pod or a chest strap that costs $70. So that's also more reasonable. But then we get into some of the caveats of that. And so in this case, for example, running power doesn't account for wind. So on a day like today, which is actually fairly windy, or where I live in the Netherlands, where it's windy every day, all day long, then if I go out run, that kills my pace and kills everything if I'm trying to base it purely on power alone. And like I ran a marathon a few years back that was a point-to-point marathon along the French coast, and it was 100% headwind the entire time, and a very, very strong one. And that impacted my PR attempt that day. Like, there's no question about it. When I had a headwind for 3 hours, it sucks. And so you can't pace based on these technologies with that. And then finally, the underlying training platforms behind them don't properly support these technologies. So on a Garmin device, for example, you can't properly pace with running power natively. You can't transfer running-based workouts to this watch natively. You can on some other devices. You can on Polar devices and Cinto devices, for example, but then there's other caveats there as well. So it's just, there are so many caveats that people look at all these things, the average consumer, and goes, no, next. Right, and that's the challenge with running power. And it's sort of almost a similar story with AERO sensors as well. There are so many companies that are developing AERO sensors right now, but only 2 of them have actually started shipping. So only AeroPod or PowerPod based from VivoComp out of Florida, and then Notio out of Montreal has started shipping sensors. But the number of consumers that have seemingly bought those sensors is so small, and the visibility to consumers of those sensors is also incredibly small. And by that I mean that I don't see anyone using them. And if me and my little circle of all the people that I follow have yet to see anyone actually using these sensors, that's a challenge for the end consumer. And these companies need to find ways to raise visibility of this sort of thing, because the potential is huge here. The potential for especially triathletes or cyclists that are looking at kind of the time trial realm is massive, to save so much time, and the gains are huge, but the technology is still cumbersome. Even trying to do aero testing, like even if you get past that, you've bought everything, you've paid all this money, you got it on your bike, how do you test? How do you explain to someone that on their bike and their aero bars, the difference between their hands like this and like that is huge, right? That couple millimeters is huge. How do you explain to someone on the side of the road that's what they're gonna do? Or how do you tell them what to do next? And none of these companies are doing that. They're basically saying, here's a pretty box, good luck. And it's just not gonna work. Another area that's kind of an interesting, sort of in between like the accelerating and kind of crapping out, is power meters. Power meters are, of course, ubiquitous now in from an amateur cycling standpoint, but the number of companies is kind of the more interesting story. Certainly, people are buying more power meters than ever before. But now there's like 18 to 20 power meter players. What you see there is most of the active players, there's 1 or 2 that have disappeared there in the last little while. But consumers are kind of getting a bit bored, I think, and partly because pricing is stagnated. It was like this rush down to roughly the $399 price point, and there are a couple offerings that are sub $400 but those have either gone out of business in the case of Watt Team, or aren't yet available in the case of IQ Squared, or have too many limitations in the case of Avio with not supporting Bluetooth Smart, for example, that you end up just in this weird, like, I don't really want to commit to a lesser solution. So I think if I look at the power meter industry, until either companies start offering things that are of interest to consumers, and I don't necessarily know what that is exactly. So if you can't offer more features and there's more competition, the only thing you can do is to continue to drop price. And so there's that element, and there's also the element of companies like Shimano, right, the giants in the industry, someday figuring out how to make an accurate power meter. Shimano makes a power meter today, not so accurate. And until they make an accurate power meter and they make it affordable at the same price point as the rest of your components in your bike, then this won't really shift the landscape of power meters. Which don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying power meters are doing bad. They're doing better than ever before. But I think we're seeing a bit of stagnation here. I think we're going to see a little bit of consolidation as well over the next little while. So finally, two last things, start with challenges and then opportunities. Number one, challenges for the industry. Privacy continues to be a big thing. We've seen, of course, the big ticket items and whatnot of the last little while from different companies around privacy and athletic data. I think GDPR has helped a little bit of that, to be honest, because it's kind of like set some of these companies down their place, which has helped. But I think there's also lots of opportunity where we're still going to have some really big high-profile failures over the next couple of years where people step back and go, maybe we shouldn't have been doing that in the right way, or in that particular way, we should do it in a different way. And that gets into a little bit of consumers aren't really understanding how their data is used, right? They see this huge, agreements of how the data can be used in fitness data especially, but they don't necessarily understand it until it pops out the other side as something creepy, and then they go, wait a second, I gave you my data over here, and then you've got it over here. So that was weird. Like even just recently, just last week, I got an email from Coros, GPS watchmaker that I showed earlier, the budget one, and I have just a normal account on Coros, just like a Garmin Connect account or a Polar Flow account, and the email said, hey, here's our sales pitch for gels from a company we just partnered with. And I'm like, I get that I probably did sign a checkbox that says I could get marketing pitch from your company, but as a consumer in the sports tech industry, that by and large doesn't actually happen. I can't remember the last time I got a marketing email from a company, and I've signed up for like every account there is on earth in the sports tech realm. Like I've got them all, but I don't remember ever getting a case where a company was pitching me their like friends' products basically. And that was an example of like, that's kind of creepy. And then you get into like, where they're going to start recommending that, hey, based on your runs lately, you should be doing 3 gels. So go ahead and buy the 3 gel packet instead. And that's where things can get creepy. Like I talked about earlier with the Bontrager Trek, it's a very fine line between being normal and creepy. And then finally, I think bad academic studies, especially in the sports tech realm, around heart rate, around accuracy, are going to continue to hurt this industry because a lot of those studies just aren't done correctly. So, as always, kind of your biggest opportunities. And some of these will sound obvious. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But again, the goal is to make users say, holy crap. To make users look at something and go, how did I not have this before? And it doesn't have to be like this magical, like you don't have to like put Spotify on a wearable. Like that's a holy crap moment. But for most of you in this room trying to develop apps, you're not going to be able to do that. Instead, you need to solve very finite problems that users look at and go, I wish I had a way to fix this. And that's a holy crap moment. Like earlier talked about with Connect IQ adding animations, right? And if I explain that to a normal person, they're gonna look at that and go, shrug, right? But the people in this room understand that could potentially be a holy crap moment. If you're an app that's doing indoor gym workouts, now you can show someone how to do a squat. Now you can show someone how to do different movements from that animation, right? So that's an example, something that is a geeky technical thing, and now making a totally functional, usable feature that then moves that person forward. That moves that consumer from doing a bad squat or a bad move in a gym that they could get injured to doing it correctly. And then finally, as always, like I always say at the end of every single presentation, if you just make cool shit, it'll all work out every single time. So thank you very much.